This is Nailing the Apex. I'm Tim Haraney, joined by Jesse Blake and Adam Wylde, who's got 20% left on your battery, Adam?
25%, okay? We're running a little low on fuel, and I don't know where my charging cord is. I think it's in the studio at work, and I'm at home. And Jesse, are you surprised by this development?
Not really. It's classic Adam, is what I'd call it.
Yeah. Oh man.
Anyway.
All right, so we'll keep this one fairly short so we don't lose Adam, but yeah, I just wanted to have you guys on to discuss a little bit more stuff from the weekend because I didn't really get to break down too much of things that I wanted to talk about on Sunday night because I got in at like 10 o'clock at night thanks to the Hamilton and Leclerc disqualification. So yeah, that was something. But wanted to first touch on the sprint race weekends because, a lot of the reason why, both drivers were disqualified was simply because of the sprint weekend. But first of all, I don't know if you guys got to watch, but throughout the season, have you found this iteration of sprint weekend, because it's different from last year, did you find it interesting? Do you like it?
I find it less exciting. I liked it more when there was something on the line other than a few points. Starting positions and that sort of thing. I like that. I disagree with Max Verstappen's opinion that, we already know what the cars look like by the time the race day comes. Because I don't care that I already know that. I still want to see the race. I like racing. So anything that creates more of a race, I like. I just don't like the fact, and I guess teams hated the fact last year that this used to mean something for Sunday. And now it doesn't. And Friday has everything to do with Sunday. Saturday has nothing to do with either day. And then Sunday is its own thing. And that to me, that's where it feels disjointed. But Jesse, I'm not really sure, where you kind of stand on that.
No, I agree in that I don't like that Saturday has become its own independent race day where you have the sprint shootout where it's the qualifying for the sprint, and then you have the sprint, which is its own independent thing, and then you have the qualifying on Friday and then the race on Sunday. I like that if it was all connected and all meant something all together. And you see that teams are struggling with the cars just from day to day because you saw Haas make upgrades after the sprint, and then Aston Martin kind of took the race as like a test, as they were saying after the race, but it worked out for Stroll and his car. But You're seeing teams struggle because of how little practice they get. And I think if we're hurting the race on Sunday by limiting the amount of practice that these teams are getting on the track, then overall I think it's a net negative for F1.
Yeah, 100%. I think you make some really good points there. I mean, and we touched on it a bit on Sunday, but how does it, affect the teams throughout the weekend? And, I discussed it on the pod on Sunday, but for those who missed it, essentially the teams are missing 2 other practice sessions. So 2 hours worth of track time where they can actually learn more about the car and then try to make changes to their cars to really optimize them. Because at the end of the day, I mean, with this iteration of Formula, it's really difficult to get the cars tuned in. So you're not running into issues like plank wearing throughout the weekend. And in the case of Mercedes, Aston Martin, like Jesse, you had mentioned, essentially just 60 minutes is not enough to figure out a new upgrade, figure out how the upgrade works with high fuel load, low fuel load. And in Mercedes' case, they didn't even get a chance to test the high fuel load setup. So they had no idea what they were getting into, right? And an F1 car is extremely particular. It's very tricky to get set up and get right and get into that legality zone. And you need a lot of time to do that, especially like I'd mentioned, bringing upgrades. And so I think for Toto Wolff and his stance, he doesn't think they should be meddling with the F1 sprint weekends. And if they are, kind of means that it's not working. Where on the other side of the fence, Horner feels that they should be meddling with these sprint weekends to see what works, so it adds more jeopardy to the entire weekend. And in the case of Verstappen, his point was essentially that, look, you're going to wake up on Sunday and you kind of already know how Sunday's Grand Prix is going to play out because you know who already has the fastest car because of what you saw in the sprint. And technically, he's got a point with that. So, you kind of had to look at it where how can it change? And so I had mentioned this in my Sports Center hit on the Sunday evening. And, the teams in F1, they need to get together, have a chat about sprint weekends. And, guys, it could go through a makeover for next year. Jonathan Noble actually wrote about this, I believe it was today, to go check out that article. But essentially, like, there are some options that are on the table that are being discussed, and I'd heard about it on Saturday. But one of those is reverse grid. So instead of doing the shootout on a Saturday morning, you get rid of that, and then you can give the team some more practice time as well. Either you do your qualifying for the Grand Prix on the Friday afternoon, or you do it on the Saturday morning. But essentially, it's trying to give the teams back more track time before they enter Parc Fermé. So essentially, what's happening after FP1, these cars are going straight into Parc Fermé conditions, and they can't touch the car afterwards. And that's kind of silly, right, guys? If you think about it, like.
Yeah, I wondered about that too, and I was gonna. There was a couple suggestions I was gonna say, guys, because the first thing is the whole point is they want to make those weekend passes, if you're on the ground, more valuable, and you want to boost the TV ratings on the Friday. So my question is, if you want to boost the TV ratings on the Friday, you've got to balance the points a little bit more for wherever you put the sprint race, whether that's Friday or Saturday. But the points have to matter more for the sprint race. They just do. Like if we rewind to like 2021 with Max and Lewis going head to head, these sprint races would have really counted for something, right? And that was the season before we even got them. My thinking is put the sprint race on the Friday. And qualify. Like, here's the thing: if you have a sprint race weekend, there's only 6 or 7 of them throughout the year. Have practice start on Thursday, and allow the budgets. The budget cap should allow for that. There's going to be costs. There's going to be more team meals. There's going to be more tires used. There's going to be everything, right? They should increase the budgets to allow that. So then, if you're going to do that, you get your 3 practice sessions in on the Thursday. You get people in earlier, which is also good. We like that. And obviously don't do it on a back-to-back, right? Don't do it on the second half of a back-to-back. So you have that. And then as soon as that sprint race is done on the Friday, you are not in Parc Fermé until you take the track on qualifying day, first lap. And the reason I say that, or you leave the garage, because that's when if you see something, like if you're Mercedes and you're a little bit slower on the straightaways, but you're good in the corners, kind of like they were this weekend. Too bad Lewis was too close to the ground. He totally screwed me on Grid Rival right away. I was 10 points behind second place, and then he got disqualified, and now I'm 100 points behind the next guy. It's just killed me. But if you have that opportunity, if you're Mercedes and you're looking at Red Bull and you're like, okay, we feel like if things go our way, we could, and we tweak this, and this, we could get them in qualifying tomorrow. How exciting would that be, right? Why does it have to be you can't touch the car all weekend? I understand as soon as qualifying starts, you can't touch the car. I get it. Don't understand why the sprint race would have anything to do with that. We want people in the door on Friday. When the Formula One comes to your country or your city, you want to take a 3 or 4 day weekend. That's how I want Formula One fans to be. It gets more concessions, it gets more beer, it gets more everything sold. And I think the other way that you could do it is leave the schedule the same, but Parc Fermé does not happen until, like, if you qualify it on Friday, doesn't happen until the sprint race on Saturday or something like that. There's got to be, because then it gets into gimmicky shit and where it's like, well, you've got to have at least. I've seen people suggest make the sprint race 21 laps, and every 7 laps you have to pit and put different tires on. And it's like, is that racing, or is that just we're creating a scenario that would never exist and we're going, woo, this will be fun? And it would be fun, but is it true blue racing, and do we care? So I'll turn it over to you guys, but those are some of the ideas I had.
What do you think, Jesse?
I think about the traditionalist F1 fan and the new F1 fan, and I wonder if F1's, the way they've gone in the last few years, where everything's been expansion, we have more races than we're ever going to have. They're going to add more teams to the grid. The weekends are jam-packed now, and I wonder if F1's going to get into a situation where they're exhausting both sides of the fan base, because the average fan it seems like they don't have enough time to be glued in from Friday through Sunday, where they got to watch the qualifying and then the sprint, and then the sprint qualifying, the sprint shootout, and then also the race on Sunday. And the traditionalist F1 fan is kind of pushing back on it because sprints is something that never existed 2 years ago. So I wonder, there's a really difficult balance that F1 has to have, and the higher ups here, the executives who are making these decisions, on if they're going to exhaust the fan with everything they're adding to racing, So I wonder where they're going to land on that balance, because obviously they need to expand to grow the sport. They need to be adding more. But in terms of a weekend, when is it too much?
Yeah, that's a great point that you make, because, if you go back to Saturday here in Austin, like, the ticket sales were down for Saturday, right? There was a decline in attendance for a Saturday at COTA for, Grand Prix weekend. And, that's not like for that to happen here. And, usually this race for the past, when they've done it over the past 4 years, I mean, it's been very successful, guys. Like, we're going to tell you, I remember coming here and working it last year, and there was over 400,000 people here. Like, it was like, for the weekend, it was nuts. You couldn't get out of here. Like, it was hard to leave the track, where, Saturday evening, it was a little bit easier than last year. And so, yeah, I think like you're diluting the product a bit. I think also, obviously having Max and Red Bull sewing up those championships. But outside of that, though, I mean, I think, Christian Horner had a point where there's no real jeopardy that these drivers are having to face. Like, what is really on the line? And, technically he's right. There isn't really anything on the line, especially not now, right? There's no championship. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, like, so what do you do if you want to move forward with the sprint weekends? And look, I appreciate the fact that, I said this on Sunday, but I appreciate the fact F1 is trying different things. Mm-hmm. Like, I appreciate that. But I think you can't, you have to have the sport first, and the entertainment has to come, secondary, because I think, like, in talking to all these teams and all the stuff I learned this weekend, like, as we get closer to next season, like, I think we're going to see some proper friggin' racing at the front. Like, it just, like, looking at what Mercedes did over the weekend, like, oh yeah, holy shit. And so I think at the end of the day, they have a point where the sport does have to come first. And I think, like, you gotta, if you're going to do these sprint things, you've got to take from other things that racing have done in the past. So if you're going to do it, then reverse the grids, and have that be a heat, and set your grid for Sunday. You get all your practice sessions in.
And for anybody that doesn't know what reverse grid is, can you explain that?
Sure. So if you can do it by championship order. So Verstappen would start at the back. So you'd start 20th.
Be so sick.
Right? It would be entertaining. So that you would flip the entire grid. So like Sargent would have been on pole.
Hey, that's points getter. First since Andretti, Logan Sargent, to everybody who's giving him shit. All right?
But at the end of the
Give
day,
Williams a break.
But at the end of the day, like, he would be battling for points, first of all. But at the same time, like, you're setting your grid for the Sunday, right? There is jeopardy on the line there. Like, there is something, like, Max can carve his way through the field, but he's got to be careful, right? Like, he can't just, go send one down the inside on somebody and hope that they don't turn in on him and damage the cars, and he's screwed for Sunday. So he's got to manage that, and so does Perez, and so does Hamilton. Like, those three drivers, because that's your top three in the driver standings. Like, so I think at the end of the day, that's something that you could consider, and that's stuff that we did in go-karts, and that's stuff that's, like, proven.
So and as racers, you would be good with that, right? Because you are.
I would, yeah. I think so. And it would help the show, it would help the entertainment side. But I don't think you can have, like, 6 of them either. Like, for this year, it's just too many. Like, I was cool with just doing the 3 like they had last year and the year before. And then just having that set your grid. It wasn't a reverse. You had to qualify to get to those positions. But, I think that there was more jeopardy on the line then. And, you go back to 2021, right, guys? Like that. I mean, obviously everything that happened with that season, but you sprinkled in a few of those sprint weekends, and, like, they actually friggin' meant something, right? Like, that was, like, remember Hamilton, where was it? Brazil, perfect example. like having to carve his way through the field to claw back championship points. Like things like that just stand out to me.
How many sprint weekends are there, guys?
6.
Okay. How many points do you get for winning?
8.
Okay. So here's a thought. And I only saw this because I was watching some NASCAR highlights yesterday.
Nice.
And I'm not suggesting that they get on an oval. Although people give NASCAR drivers a lot of shit, and NASCAR drivers do road courses too. All right, I've seen Watkins Glen. I'd love to see anybody race at Watkins Glen. It's a fucking tough track.
It is.
But my point is, what if the NBA is doing this too in November? We're going to see how this works. It works in soccer. Very European, right? We need to, F1 is extremely European. So we need to appeal a little bit to that sense of what their identity is. There is the FA Cup, there's the Euro Cup, there's the World Cup, there's a bunch of cups that happen throughout. And I wonder if you take the sprint race, whenever you do it, and I do think it matters that you're not in Parc Fermé when you're in the sprint race. Like I think Parc Fermé should start when qualifying starts, and that should be after the sprint race. But if you were to build in a secondary sort of cup that has significant points, let's say because there's like a playoff in NASCAR, I'm not sure quite how it works, but let's say you have 100 points on the line. So if you win, or if you get, basically it's on how many placements you get. So if Jesse and Tim and I are racing and we're the top 3 drivers on the grid, and I get a bunch of second places, and Jesse and Tim split the firsts and the thirds, well, whoever gets the more firsts wins that 100 points, and it's all one lump sum. And at least then there's because here's the thing, if you get a bunch of points and you just keep getting a bunch of points, like a Max Verstappen would have, then it kind of becomes like, well, shit, we already know who's going to take this 4 or 5 races in. But if there's a way that you can keep people interested and have a secondary thing that adds to your World Cup or your World Championship points that you don't get awarded until it's decided, I feel like that could be more interesting as well. I'm a fan of more racing. I'm not a fan of taking away from Sunday. So we've got to find a way for these guys to practice. I think there's got to be something else on the line. And for anybody that says, and I know there's a lot of F1 traditionalists all of a sudden, don't know why. All of a sudden people are like, well, I'm a traditionalist. Okay, well, then you want to go back to only 8 cars getting points. And, I think when Andretti scored his last points, he was 3rd place, and I think he got like 4 points. Like it was like nothing. So is that really what you want to go back to, or are you mad that your friend down the street who didn't give a shit about F1 before now likes it? I think we got to be open to kind of good ideas here and different ideas and trying some things. And I think in the next 2 to 3 years, they have a window where they can try some things out, see what works, see what doesn't, and then kind of make a call for the 2026 season when the new regulations kick in. So you try to have some sort of tradition built by then. The other thing, Tim, is on the Saturday point, on people not being there. I do think that
there were people here. Don't get me wrong.
There were people, but not as many. Maybe
there were people here. There was like 90-something thousand, right? It just wasn't sold out like last year's.
The weekend traditionally does like 500,000, right? So if it wasn't completely sold out, maybe the problem is the fact that everybody wants the race and everybody kind of knows where Max is going to be. And I do think the most exciting thing that Formula One has going for it is upgrade packages. Look at what has happened with McLaren. Look at what's happened with Mercedes closing that gap. Max isn't winning by 17 seconds. He's winning by 2 or 3. And as much as people are like, oh, he's winning, he's still winning. Yeah, but it's pretty tight now. And we're you saw him talking about his brakes and that sort of thing. Like now they feel a little bit under pressure. I like that. I think we got to, whatever it takes to make the upgrade packages really matter, the pass or the fail on them, I think that's going to be the future of making this sport really exciting throughout the weekend.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Jesse, what do you think?
Yeah, I think since like April onwards, I've been kind of hammering this point, and Tim, you've mentioned it countless times on this podcast. But if Max wasn't around this season, it would be one of the most eventful seasons that we've ever had in F1 because from week to week, from like even day to day on a weekend, the teams really have no idea what the cars are going to do because of the rules and regulations and how differently like the floors react to each track. And it would be such a competitive field if Max wasn't there. So there's a lot of hope for F1 right now because the race on Sunday was fascinating because Max started in sixth. He had to find his way through the field, and everybody was kind of bunched up, and you didn't know where it was going to finish. And there's so much passing that happened on the track. And I think if we look at the outlook going forward for F1, they're in a really good place with the regulations because their idea of, hey, every week you don't know who's going to win, it's come true except for first place. So I think if we just go forward with the regulations, they stick with these for a lot longer, and these teams continue to get closer and closer and jam this pack together. And if Adrian Newey can just not be so smart, and he can like his brain can just like lose a couple brain cells and not invent the fastest car ever, this F1 would be in a fantastic place where everybody from McLaren to Aston Martin to Mercedes to Red Bull to Ferrari could have a chance every single weekend to win. And who knows who could win the Drivers' Championship at that point.
Man, that is such a good point. By the way, forget Newey losing brain cells. How the hell do you have that many intelligent engineers and not a single one has figured out how that their rear wing does that? You know what I mean? Like well, not a single team has figured out that how Red Bull magically finds 20 or 30 miles an hour in a 10-second stretch when they do that. Well, are you kidding me? This guy's that good? That's crazy.
It's not just like the rear wing, right? It's like it's the whole car and how it, interacts essentially. Like they don't. All right, Verstappen qualified like whatever it was, he started sixth for Sunday's race. Like that's how fast they were. Like they made mistakes. Max made mistakes, but the car just wasn't fast enough. Like so, when you look at the qualifying deltas, these teams have caught up, right? They've caught up in the qualifying deltas. It's the race pace that is still lacking, and that comes down to like tire deg. How does the Red Bull handle its tires better than everybody else? And that's pretty much it. Like these teams are really, and Max obviously being
nobody wants to give Max any credit, man. This guy's fucking walking on water right now. He's amazing.
Like these teams have really nailed them back. Like they have made a difference. They have clawed performance back. It's taken them a little longer than I thought it was going to, but at the end of the day, I mean, I was talking to Zach Brown about this, right? And I don't know if you guys listen to the pod, but he essentially said like he thinks they're catchable. Like he thinks they can catch them next season. And
based on his upgrade packages, I would agree.
But when you think? Yeah, but when you hear other journalists and they're all like, well, Red Bull's going to take a step and they're going to be out in front, and it kind of sounds like it's doom and gloom and we're going to get the same thing, but some of those journalists are right that, the Red Bull is going to take a step. I don't think it's going to be the step that people think it's going to be. I don't think that Red Bull is going to be keeping this huge advantage into next season because the teams are going to claw them back. I just think the clawing back is going to happen when we get to like race 5, 6, or 7 of next season. Like that's what I think. And that's what I think is going to end up happening. And and that's going to turn F1 back into this growing machine again. Like this weekend it was rammed packed here, guys, like rammed packed. Even though I'm sitting here saying like, oh yeah, sales were down on Saturday and Sunday was sold out, right? It was sold out. People did come to watch a great race, which we got. Shame that, we had to find out what the finishing results were like 4 hours afterwards, but it's a topic for another day.
But by the way, did they only inspect 4 cars? Did I hear that right?
So they essentially what happened was the FIA randomly selected 4 cars, and it was essentially the top 4
of course, Charles had to be Charles Leclerc. Right? Like forget Lewis. What a weekend for him. Oh my God. Like his team screws up his strategy. And by the way, we also put your car too low and you didn't know that. So you're now, not only did you think you had a shot to win, you didn't get that because we screwed it up. Also, you're going to be DQ'd. Like terrible.
It's a hard thing to it's a hard thing to manage. I mean, how are you supposed to manage that? Like I mean, when you get the cars, they come in, right? And you come out of the media center and you like look to your right because that's where the track entrance is for pit lane, and you look down and there is like a row of cars. Like every single Formula One car is literally right beside you and they're parked. You can't touch them. They have security around them because what they're doing is they're being inspected. The FIA is coming around and doing their due diligence and inspecting cars. And then they randomly just pick you, and you. We're going to take these cars apart a little bit more and we're going to delve a little deeper into things. And so those were the 4 cars that were chosen. It's the timing of the decision, right, Jesse? I mean, like, you want to, as a sports fan, you want to leave the event knowing who's won or lost.
Yeah, and it becomes even more ridiculous when you look at how afterwards Lewis is on a podium and he's holding up a trophy, and the Mercedes Instagram page posts, "Hey, congratulations on P2, you know, we're in second place, we're back up top." And then literally hours later you go about your day, and 4 hours later you find out all of those results are null and void. And for a fan, you leave confused because you left the racetrack celebrating your team's victory and all that. And it's not great for the sport that they can't solve this a lot quicker. And I think that's something that the FAA has to look at immediately going into this offseason, is we need to get these things done right away after the race. If we're looking at the planks to see the wear, to see if it's too low, then that needs to be done before guys hold up a trophy. Because it's ridiculous to go back after somebody's been declared second place and third place to go take that back.
Yeah.
Is there any reason, guys, why they can't do it before the race? Like, is it in a case of measuring?
There are some things, right, Adam, that they can't, like for a fuel sample, like they have to take fuel samples from everyone's car, right? And you can't do that before a race because the tanks are full. Like you can't just, we can get a fuel sample now. It's like, no, you need to see if they've played by the rules and used the same amount of fuel as everyone else, because that's part of the rule, right? You're only allotted so much fuel, and you have to have the hybrid do a lot of the work too. That's the idea with these regulations, power unit. And so you have to take a sample following to make sure there's a little bit left, to make sure that the hybrid unit was working the way it should be and the power unit as a whole is working the way it should be. And it's difficult, I think, for the FIA too. You know, it's not easy measuring like plank wear and then all of a sudden coming out with the result. It's not like, Joe Bauer's down there looking at everything and then all of a sudden illegal. Right. You're done. It's like, it's got to go through a process. And I think even for the FIA, they would like it to be sped up too. Like they would want this to be taken care of faster as well. I think for them, it just comes down to trying to figure out what are the best ways to make sure that they're doing their job properly, to make sure that they're fulfilling their obligation as well at the same time. And for the most part, they've actually done a really good job. And this season, they've really ramped things up as well. And that brings us to track limits.
Oh, God. It's like bunting in baseball. Just so fun.
Okay, so track limits was an issue for the sprint. We all saw that. A few drivers getting 5-second time penalties because of track limits. So track limits is essentially when the driver goes over the white line on the exit, and that's gaining an advantage essentially. So the white line over the weekend was painted bigger. So the drivers could avoid track limits. They could see the white line, so they knew how far they were getting in terms of pushing the envelope with those track limits. But guys, the white line, like, it's just not working.
Yeah, this has been a few races in a row now that the track limits have just kind of taken over, and you're kind of just watching. You're seeing, okay, when are they going to get the black and white flag? When is the next one? Who's going to have the 5-second time penalty? And then try and outrace it. And it's this added layer to the race that we're getting. It seems every single weekend, and I don't know what the solution is, just by because you can't change track limits because you need to keep the guys on the track, but you need to change probably some of the corners. If everybody goes off on a specific corner, then I think it's the corner's fault and maybe not the driver's fault.
The cars are bigger. Cars are bigger now than they've ever been. The other thing, Jesse, is first off, it's another sport where linesmen are absolutely useless. Just hockey and F1, just useless linesmen. But I wanted to say, like, to that point, tennis can get it right with a tennis ball. Is there any particular reason why you can't just figure this out with microchipping and have them on the outside rim of the tire or whatever it is you need to do? And my thought process with that is twofold, because not only would it automatically let the drivers know, then it takes the human element out of it, where and the FIA has been, like, let's be honest, the FIA has been completely biased towards the stars before. They want to promote their superstars, and they've done shady stuff in the past where guys are not getting penalties that they should. But I'm thinking that if it updates live during the race, the instantaneousness of a computer system, then hey, Stroll's got a 5-second penalty, Hamilton's got a 5-second penalty, Max got a 5-second penalty, and you can almost build it into your race strategy. Hey, we expect to get at least one 5-second penalty today. Based on that, are we going to serve it at the end, or are we going to serve it during? And, at least then it becomes a factor in it, rather than, oh, we're going to do this 3 times and then we're going to get a flag and then we'll see. And it's like, it seems I think the biggest problem with this for me is its inconsistency. It's not that there's going to be track limits and you got to stay on them. And if you look at, it's funny watching it now, because you go look at highlights from 10 years ago, guys are just blowing past other guys on the track, and there's no penalty for it. It's crazy. But if we are going to enforce these things, and it seems like they want to, I think that you got to do better than the thing that they would have done in the 1930s. I think we got to have a newer system. We're literally eyeballing it, and we got to do better than that. I think that's my personal opinion.
I think, but it goes a little deeper than that as well. I mean, even Lando Norris had talked to us about this Saturday evening following the sprint, and in particular George Russell's 5-second time penalty. And so if the race had been longer, George, technically he could have used track limits, made a pass, just received a 5-second time penalty, but the race would have been so long that he could overcome that 5-second time penalty because he has the pace. And so, he gets a 5-second time. It doesn't mean anything, right? Not unless there's someone who is less than 5 seconds behind him, which if he has more pace, he could lose maybe 1 position instead of 3 or 4. And so I think at the end of the day, I'm like, track limits and all, I do get it, but at the same time, it's it's just not working. And I think you need something that's like a natural deterrent, natural track limits. And
so gravel?
Yeah. Why not put down gravel strips? If you've got your curbing, then after your curbing, why can't you just put down a few gravel strips, and then you have your concrete runoff where you can, still safely slow the car down? That is still a deterrent. That, having a gravel strip or something of that nature on the outside, it will slow you down.
Right.
Because the car can't get any traction. So you're probably going to either spin, you're going to lose time, but you're not going to be able to make a pass. There's no way. It's impossible.
I love that. I love it because if your actual goal is to keep people on the track, then create an area that keeps people on the track. And when you're on a street course, the track limit is the wall, because you can't go over that. And if you're on a more traditional racetrack, just put the gravel down and slow down the cars. So if you go off the track, it is an actual limit, and you're hurting yourself if you do that. I think that's great.
Yeah,
I think in turn. Let me see if I get. Is it turn 1 in Austria? They have a giant yellow sausage curb on the exit there. And, drivers do their best to not get in. It is, and having something like that is a little dangerous for sure. Cause it can launch a car, no question. But the corner is not, the exit of that, it's not fast enough to really do any serious damage. But having that curb there, that's enough to deter the driver from going over track limits, because it's going to damage underneath the car, but you're also going to go slower at the same time. Right. McLaren, Adam, you happy?
Well, as long as my computer's still running, very happy, thrilled. I think I didn't know what was wrong. Oscar just seemed to have a bad car this weekend. I don't know what happened there, but I love the fact that they're ahead of Aston Martin now. And I still think if they push hard, maybe they could make Ferrari sweat a little bit. Just make them sweat. I mean, there's only 4 races left. It's pretty set, but it would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And Jesse, you happy with Mercedes?
No, I'm disappointed, obviously, for the result of
Oh,
Lewis.
yeah.
Like that. I think the second place finish got me amped, and I was like, we're back, And then that got taken away, so I was a little deflated by that. But overall, outside of that, yes, I thought it was a good weekend for Mercedes, where they demonstrated that they do have a car that can compete. And it wasn't the fastest in a straight line, but when those corners happened, and Max with the struggle of his braking, they picked up a lot of time there. And George was a little further back in the field because I think he struggled a little all weekend with the car. I don't think he ever got happy with what he had. But Lewis's performance was fantastic, and it felt like racing of old, seeing Lewis trying to hunt down Max and them 1-2 in the racetrack.
One more lap, and Hamilton would have got him for sure. I mean, definitely the upgrades that Mercedes have brought to this car, it definitely worked. That floor has definitely produced some performance, and that bodes well for them for next season for sure, because they've got, look at the car that they've got. I mean, I think I called it like a Frankenstein car the other day. Like, it's just it's like all these little pieces bolted on to this chassis that just is not working, and they're still managing to make it quick. I mean, that bodes well for next season for sure. Aston Martin, just real quick. I mean, I want to talk about Lance for a couple minutes, because I thought he actually, considering everything that happened to him this past weekend, he actually on pace was with Fernando. Stroll and Alonso, they both had brake issues due to overheating because of the upgrade packages that Aston Martin had brought to the car. But Friday, Stroll's overheating, the overheating from his brakes damaged the brakes, so he only had 5 laps of running in free practice 1, but his pace was quite strong. Scoring points, that's the first time to score points since Spa. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think, Jesse, for Lance, it's just good to get some points and get that confidence going again.
Yeah, it felt like, when you got a friend who's down on his luck, he lost his job, and he's really mad at himself, and he just needs a win. It feels like Lance was in a position where things have just been going terribly the last couple of weeks, and he just needed a win. And it was so good to see him this weekend score some points and have an overall just satisfactory weekend, where the car finally, by the end of it, looked like it was working for him, and he was very competitive all weekend long. And I feel good for Aston Martin because of how hot they started, and then the struggle in the middle, and then now it seems like, okay, we're starting to come back after McLaren is the one who had the best upgrade packages for the entire season. And I feel like Aston Martin's kind of getting into a groove going into next season, and Lance Stroll in particular needed this at some point at the end of the season to just have a victory under his belt and gain some confidence back.
Yeah, well said. Jesse, this has been great. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. We've lost Adam.
2 of us now. Yeah,
almost made it through. You almost made it through.
There, a couple minutes away. If he had a little bit more charge in that laptop, he would have made it to the end.
Jesse, thanks again, man. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate Adam to take the time to do this as well. You've been watching or listening to Nailing the Apex. Please head over to Spotify, give us a 5-star rating and a follow. Same goes with that podcast as well. Write a review. It helps us grow the show. You can follow me on social media at Tim Harani, and we will be back later this week with a very special guest. We'll talk to you all later.